Welcome back. Today we will see how to add functions to our C++ program. So far the only function we've seen in this class is the main function, and we've been writing all the lines of code within the main function. Now let's see how to organize our code better by adding more functions to our C++ program. Now before we go to functions, first let's quickly look at the difference between a global and a local variable. All variables in C++ live in a scope. The scope is either global or local, and it depends on where the variable is declared and defined. So for example, when a variable is declared outside a function, such variables have global scope. That is, they exist throughout the program and they can be accessed anywhere within the program. Now a good practice is to make all global variables constant. That is, we don't want such variables to change its value throughout the program. We want its variable to be constant. To do this, we can use the const qualifier. So in line 39, I'm declaring a variable called gravity. Its type is double. And notice it's declared outside a function. So it's a global variable. And here I'm making it a constant by using the const qualifier. So before the data type, if we add a const, such variables are made a constant. Now with constant variables, these variables needs to be declared and initialized at the same time. That is, you're not allowed to declare the variable first and then initialize this variable with a value in the next line. This is a valid syntax with regular variables. However, you're not allowed to do this with constant variables. Here we have two different errors. The first error says that gravity is a constant variable and it's not initialized. So let's initialize this back. But notice this is not sufficient. You're not allowed to also change its value or assign a new value. The second error says that there is a redefinition. So here what happens is that you're not allowed to write an assignment statement outside a function. So I need to move this piece of code inside the main function. However, again we have an error. Now this time the error is different. The error says that gravity is a constant variable and it cannot be assigned a value. So what this shows is that one, when a variable is declared outside a function, it's a global variable. Such variables can be accessed anywhere within the program. So we can print the value of this variable called gravity within the main function, or we can access it in any other function that we add to this CPP file. Now the second type of variable is a local variable. A local variable exists only within the scope where it's declared and defined. So in line 44, I'm declaring a variable called local, and this is declared within the main function. So this variable can be accessed only within the main function. Outside the main function, this variable local will not exist in memory and it cannot be accessed. Now let's see how to add a new scope within the function. So for example, when we want to restrict a variable's lifetime within a function, we can do this by adding a new scope. To do this, you can add a pair of braces and write lines of code within the pair of braces. So here in line 51, I'm declaring an integer a, initializing it to value of 10, and then printing its value in the next line. Now the question is whether we are allowed to access this variable a outside this scope, and can we print its value outside the scope. So let's compile this program. Now notice we have a compilation error in line 55, and the error says that the variable a is an undeclared identifier. So outside the scope, the variable does not exist and therefore it cannot be accessed. However, within the scope, we are allowed to access a variable. Now let's look at a different example. In line 59, I'm declaring a variable called counter, initialized to value equal to 0. And within a for loop, I'm again declaring a variable called counter. Now the first question is whether we are allowed to duplicate names. That is, whether we are allowed to use the same name multiple times within the same function. So first let's compile this program and see whether this compiles. Now notice there are no compilation errors, which means this is a legal syntax. That is, you're allowed to repeat variable names within the same function. Now this is valid only because these two variables live in a different scope. So first let's see what this for loop is doing. Let's run the program and let's see why they're in different scopes once we continue the execution. So within the for loop, I'm just incrementing the value of the counter. I'm looping 10 times and printing the value of the counter. And at the end of the loop, I also want to print the value of this counter. Now the question is, after the loop is executed, will the value of the counter be less than 10? Will it be equal to 10? Will it be more than 10? Or whether this program compiles or not. We already checked that this program compiles. So let's run this program and let's see what will be the value of this value of the counter within and outside the loop. So notice within the loop, the value of the counter is incrementing 1 at a time. So first it prints 0 and then it goes until 9. And outside the loop, the value is still equal to 0. Now the reason why this is because the counter that we declared within the for loop exists only until the for loop exists only within the for loop. That is, anywhere within the for loop, when we access this variable counter, the counter that is declared in the initialization of the for loop is accessed. However, outside the for loop, this variable does not exist. And in line 68, we are actually printing the variable that was declared in line 59. So what this shows that we can have more than one variable with the same name as long as they're in two different scopes. Line 59, we have a variable called counter, and line 60, we have a variable called counter again, but they are in two different scopes. Now let's look at a different scenario. Here I have a variable called shadowed again, and I'm creating a new scope and declaring the same variable shadowed with a different value. So outside the scope, the value is 10. Inside the scope, it's initialized with value equal to 20. And within the scope, I'm changing its value to 30. So let's print the value of this variable shadowed within the scope and outside the scope. And let's see what will be the value printed. Now notice within the scope, it's equal to 30. And outside the scope, it's equal to 10. So again, you're allowed to have two variables with the same name as long as they're in different scope. However, this is not a recommended practice. You should always use different variable names as much as possible. This will only help you to not accidentally modify a variable and use it somewhere else within the program. It will be hard to find such bugs. To avoid it, it's better to write different variable names for different variables within the program, even if they're living in different scopes.